Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point. Hello and welcome. The presidents of US and Iran recently spoke to each other for the first time since 1979. That was almost 35 years ago. Iran's new president has also publicly taken a much more conciliatory tone towards the US. He says he's willing to help dispel any misgivings about Iran's nuclear program, and Iran's parliament has endorsed these actions. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, on the other hand, has a word of caution.
Ahmadinejad was a wolf in wolf's clothing. Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing. A wolf who thinks he can pull the wool over the eyes of the international community.
So who should we believe, and what does it mean for US-Iran relations in the near future? To talk about this, we have two guests in our studios. Dr. Shiri Hunter is the author of 7 books on Islam in the modern era. She's also directing a project on reformist Islam at Georgetown University. And Ambassador James Jeffrey is a fellow at the Washington Institute. His focus, US strategies to counter Iran's influence in the Mideast. Welcome to Access Point.
Thank you very much.
Starting with you, Dr. Hunter,
Yes.
Do we believe that Iran has a new foreign policy, or do we heed caution as Prime Minister Netanyahu suggested?
Well, personally, I would be very bold, and I would say after that, when even many Israelis don't believe what Netanyahu is saying, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be cautious in testing Iran's intentions, but I would not believe anything that Netanyahu says. This is not, of course, the first time that Iran has reached out to U.S. It was during the Khatami period when we did not respond, especially after 2001, the unfortunate 9/11 attacks, and that they offered cooperation, and then the 2003 letter that they didn't even get anywhere. Now, while I would say that this time is even more serious, again, I'm not putting any stock on that suddenly Islamic regime has become a born-again Democrat or embracing everything. But there are two factors that are important. One is that there has been a significant shift in public opinion in Iran. Iranian population today.
Let me come to why this is happening, but I want to come to you, Ambassador Jeffrey, and first find out, do you agree with her?
Yes and no.
Okay,
let's
go ahead to the no part.
The no part is that I'm more cautious. I would be more towards where Bibi Netanyahu is. But let me say that to answer your first question, there's no doubt in my mind that Iran has a new foreign policy. There I agree with Dr. Hunter. The question is, what new foreign policy? Is it one of form, replacing Ahmadinejad's wolf in wolf's clothing with an open hand, telephone calls, smiles, the campaign, wave campaign against violence around the world with no substance? Or is it a reflection of, as Dr. Hunter said, the desire of the Iranian people for real change, real compromises to relieve folks of their sanctions? This we have to find out, not by talking here, although that's good, but by testing on the ground in negotiations what they're willing to put up for consideration. And we'll see.
Okay, so now let's get back to what you were saying. If there is a change in policy, why is that happening?
Well, first of all, that as I say, there has been, after 30 years of revolution, you have a new generation. Iranian population is far more educated. They have much more access to, despite all the restrictions, that the use of internet is very high. And then the Iranian diaspora is a very important factor. So there has been a considerable change in the attitude of people. This is in one thing. The other thing is that obviously the sanctions and other things have hurt Iran. Particularly the Iranians have realized that estrangement from US has allowed their neighbors and others to really manipulate them. Everybody has been using the Iran card to get everything out of there, including Bibi Netanyahu. Every time he wants more weapons from Congress, he comes and waves the Iranian threat. Now, But there is another thing, however, in response to Ambassador says that, yes, we have to test Iran whether they are serious or not. But there is one thing to make compromises, and the other thing is submission. I think that Netanyahu still is talking today. For example, he said that he warned the Iranians that be careful because otherwise their regime will become like the North Korean regime. Now, compromise is one thing. Iran has to show and that with transparency and other, confidence-building measures that they don't want nuclear weapons. But if it means that submission, that Iran, although India, Pakistan have nuclear weapons, that Iran cannot even have, peaceful kind of enrichment, that's a non-starter.
Here I'm going to ask you something, and Ambassador Jeffrey, I want to pitch in. Two different things we're talking about. Peaceful nuclear program, which can be accomplished without enriching uranium within the country, and enriching uranium, which can eventually be used to build a weapon. What is U.S. okay with?
I think, and I could not be sure, but I believe that the U.S. could live with a deal rather similar to that was advanced in 2009 by the P5+1, and in a different form by the Brazilians and the Turks and accepted by the Iranians in 2010, under the pressure, of course, of new UN sanctions. And that allows a certain amount of enrichment, but the amounts of enrichment are very limited. The bulk of the enriched uranium, while still Iranian property, is moved outside of the country. So therefore, the Iranians have the technology. They have the right to enrich, although that would not be specifically stated because it's not anywhere specifically stated in the NPT. But
it's implied in the NPT.
It is not specifically stated in the NPT.
But it is implied. I didn't say specifically.
And therefore, but I'm not arguing with you, Dr. Hunter. I'm saying that they could have that limited amount to meet what they could show the international community is a peaceful program. I mean, the problem, Dr. Hunter, that I don't think you and I have engaged on is there's no doubt in my mind from years at the very center of the U.S. government that Iran tried to develop and is trying to develop a nuclear weapon. There's no doubt in my mind that I and almost everybody in the region thinks, unlike the Pakistani nuclear weapon, that that is a fundamental existential threat to the region. Rightly or wrongly, that's the reality the United States has to deal with.
Well, I don't want to make this into a polemical thing, and obviously it is, Ambassador is taking that road. But the point is that if indeed, and this is something that US and Israel and others also will have to face, if they think that they are going to be, because if the purpose is not just only getting rid of regime, but if you really look at the way that Netanyahu envisages, and I am not saying this, it was an article by a gentleman by the name of Daniel Levy, who is saying that what Israel is seeking is regional hegemony. And if that is the purpose, then, and that they want to not only get rid of the Iranian regime, but maybe even lead to Iran's disintegration. And the article, let me finish, please, otherwise no use in my coming here, is that then, of course, Iranians are not going to make compromises. But if the purpose is to make sure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapon. And there is, IAEA has said they have no evidence they are trying to do it. A US intelligence report said that they are not. And with the whole experience of Iraq, I think we have to be cautious on that. If we want to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, that is possible. But if we want to use the nuclear issue to Iran to submission, that is not going to happen.
We'll come back to that. I think you want to add to that, this whole idea that Iran, you've said, is developing nuclear weapon. And Dr. Hunter, what I want to ask you is, Iran's not the only country. Pakistan's that, India's that. Nobody ever admitted to developing a nuclear weapon while it was a secret program. It was once they tested that they said, oh, by the way.
But Pakistan was not under the kind of IAEA inspections that Iran is. I mean, including in Fordow, that is such a controversial thing. The IAEA's, cameras are there. IAEA has made more inspections. Pakistan was never a member of Non-Proliferation Treaty, nor was India.
Okay,
I'm just trying to say you are actually punishing Iran for being a member of NPT and subjecting itself to these things so that they cannot have a secret weapon program.
You want to add to that?
Certainly. First of all, the IAEA has repeatedly, formally by overwhelming vote of its board of directors, appealed to the Security Council and said, based upon what we know about the Iranian program, based upon the level of cooperation and non-cooperation of the Iranian program, we cannot certify that their nuclear programs are only for peaceful purposes. Under the rules of the NPT, that requires action, initially by the IAEA. If the IAEA cannot resolve it, it goes to the Security Council. The Security Council, including the Permanent Five, have repeatedly looked at this and said the IAEA is right. Iran, which has had plenty of opportunity to explain itself, is wrong. And we are so concerned we are going to impose very, very stringent sanctions on them. That's the reality.
Let me move this. I also get into that. IAEA reports are available on IAEA websites. First of all, there are differences in IAEA.
So Dr. Hunter, yes. I get your point. I get his point. I'm saying, I understand. You're saying that Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon, or at least there's no proof. So let's let's move beyond that, because this is a new time. I want to discuss the new things that's happening. This change that we saw in the tone of President Rouhani. Some people are asking, who's pulling the strings in Iran? Is he capable of making the decisions he needs to make, or is the Ayatollah going to be the ultimate decision maker?
No. Ayatollah has made the decision, the ultimate decision. If Ayatollah did not want to give Rouhani the kind of freedom he has given him, he would not have allowed Rouhani to win the elections. So I think that if we are saying that Iranian democracy is a just complete sham, then we have to also understand that if Rouhani has been able to do it. The other thing is, when Khatami in 1998 wanted to meet with President Clinton accidentally in the UN, because Khamenei was opposed, it didn't happen. But with President Obama, the phone call took place and all the other niceties. So obviously, Khamenei is doing that. Yesterday, the Iranian parliament, overwhelmingly, all the conservatives actually said, yes, we support this policy of opening. So now in Iran, what is different, we have generally a national consensus over a policy of reaching out to U.S. and resolving problems with U.S.
Okay, so the Ambassador, President Rouhani said when somebody asked him about the phone call with President Obama that this was a small step. We will take larger steps. What steps do you think is he talking about, or steps that need to be taken?
The steps that need to be taken are complete transparent. As President Obama laid them out, transparency, meaningful and verifiable steps. They would be specifically, the Arak plant would have to be stopped because it's almost at the point of going to a plutonium development stage, which is very dangerous and almost certainly would generate a strike by one or another outside country. The enrichment situation would have to be looked at, I think, generally in the way I said, not total termination of enrichment, but verification that enrichment is only for civilian nuclear needs, and there are legitimate civilian nuclear needs for enriched uranium, and if the Iranians want to produce that enriched uranium themselves, there are ways to ensure they can do that while making sure they don't produce the kind of enriched uranium that you would use almost only for a nuclear weapon, and then to come clean on the Pachin site and their other military development programs on weaponizing a theoretical nuclear warhead. Those are the things they have to do. They do that, they get a home free card on sanctions. They don't do that, they don't get a home free card on sanctions, regardless of how many smiles, phone calls, meetings, and new diplomatic offensives. It's very simple.
So before you add to that, just want to point out, Undersecretary Wendy Sherman today indicated to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Iran may get a short-term relief from sanctions if they do some steps. How do you think that'll be received?
Well, I mean, I think that, when we are talking about the sanctions, the ones that are really, hurting Iran can be more or less self-sufficient in many ways. I think that the sanctions have reached a level where in economics we call, diminishing returns. The one that it is difficult is the blocking of the, monetary exchanges and so on. But Ambassador right now said something, which if we go that route, then we don't have any, because he included wanting that we have to have access to Iran's other military programs. Now that is adding something that it is not within the context of the NPT or within the, other thing. The other thing, however, I really would like to add that in 2005, Iran had reached with the Europeans and Salana. I mean, these are things that are out there on the web. People can go and read. They don't have to believe me. Is that they had already reached the agreement, and that's why they also signed the additional protocol, which involves, like southern visits and so on. And the Bush administration basically, and again, everybody has written it, Al-Baradei, who was the head of the thing, that scuttled this because they pursued a policy of regime change, as they wanted to do in Iraq. Now, in my opinion, what has happened because of the difficulties, the policy of regime change is still there, except that they now want to weaken Iran economically so much that either will be turmoil from within and the regime will be fall that way. And so it is, I believe, unfortunately, on the Western side, nuclear weapons have become an excuse to basically make Iran like Iraq without having to go to war. That's what it is.
I could not agree less with what the good doctor has just said. Whether President Bush really thought about regime change or not, we could debate that, but that's yesterday. We're looking at tomorrow, Aisha. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind that President Obama is the last person in the world who wants to do regime change in any place, not in Afghanistan, not in Syria, not in Libya, not in Iraq, and certainly not in Iran. What he does want, and I keep coming back to this, is certainty that Iran is not pursuing a military weapon system. Of course, the IAEA has the right within its own charter, within the rules and regulations of the NPT, and most importantly, by Chapter 7 UN Security Council resolutions, it has been charged and mandated to look into these things, and it is being rejected by the Iranians based upon this threadbare argument of, well, we didn't sign up to that. Fine. They want to have the sanctions go away, and these are very heavy sanctions, then they're going to have to do that. That isn't yielding or giving in. That is simply living up to the commitments of the NPT, which says you have to conduct yourself in such a way as to show the world that you're not pursuing a nuclear weapon. They have not met that standard, period.
May I just say something?
Yes,
I am not a novice on the arms control thing. I served in the United Nations before revolution as a delegate to CCD, and I participated in the first NPT review conference and so on. NPT things are very, very open and so on. As to the sending Iran's dossier from the IAEA, which was supposed to be within IAEA, to United Nations Security Council under Chapter 7, which in itself is an incredibly, really far-reaching interpretation and liberal interpretation of Chapter 7, because Chapter 7 says only threats, immediate threats to international peace. Now that was done, and everybody has written this under the Bush presidency's pressure. I mean, UN is not an independent thing. The great powers, the veto-holding powers, manipulate you. And then, of course, the new director of IAEA, Amano, which was elected through the Western lobbying, has always had, that's why he changed his position. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that we have also, all this international talk and community and commitments are all very useful. But how many international commitments, for example, the State of Israel has observed? Why doesn't Israel, implement UN Security Council resolutions vis-a-vis Palestinians or Lebanon or else and so on? So it is the double standards of...
So basically, I understand what both of you are saying, and yes, UN is a very complicated body. Let's talk about US-Iran for now. Ambassador, what would you advise the US government to do? We're talking baby steps here, as we know. It was a 15-minute phone call. Mm-hmm. What would you advise the US government to do as the next step?
We do not have a lot of time because of the Iraq heavy water reactor and because of the increased number of centrifuges that will allow the Iranians to work around Bibi Netanyahu's red line by going immediately within several weeks from 5% to 90% enrichment at a certain point in the near future. So therefore, time is of the essence. I was not encouraged by Secretary Sherman talking about limited sanctions relief or limited steps because frankly, the limited sanctions relief she's talking about is not, as Dr. Hunter said, what the Iranians are envisaging, which are the key ones on banking, oil exports, and such. I think we need to move very quickly to our bottom line. What do we expect the Iranians to do? And when I say we, not the United States, but essentially the P5+1, which is the bulk of the world, not people under pressure from Bush, but essentially the entire, most of the U.S., the international community. What do people want from Iran? And what are they willing to suspend, waive, or eliminate in terms of sanctions if Iran does that? That's all that this is about. It's a relatively clear-cut discussion. And regardless of how many smiles and phone calls, once again, you either meet that standard or you don't. You don't meet, well, I'm going to meet half of that standard, but if we have a happy meeting and we, have good relations with each other and we don't use violent language, then I'll be let off for the other half. It won't work that way. They have to meet it.
I want to bring in, and I know you want to answer it, but I want to bring in what Secretary Kerry said. He said that, especially after Bibi Netanyahu's speech, he said, nothing we do is going to be based on trust. It's going to be based on steps. But he also said something about talking with Iran and whether U.S. should do it. We have a soundbite from Secretary Kerry. Let's listen to that.
It would be diplomatic malpractice of the worst order not to examine every possibility of whether or not you can achieve that before you ask people to take military action or do what you have to do in order to prevent something from happening.
Diplomatic malpractice of the highest order. So definitely they want to talk. Dr. Hunter, as he said, time is of the essence. They need to move quickly. What can the Iranian regime offer
Well, to
quickly?
begin with, time is not of the essence. If I may say so, Israel since 1993 has been saying that Iran is two years away from having a nuclear weapon. I can quote chapter and verses from Shimon Peres and so on. So if he talks about wolf and so on, I think that international community, quote unquote, is also getting tired of Bibi Netanyahu crying wolf. In fact, he has made himself into a laughing kind of figure. He exaggerates so much. Now, I think that definitely everybody, it is the old saying in arms control things, trust by verify. Of course, verification is the absolute bottom line. U.S. or any other country cannot just accept the word of another country. And so now the question, however, is that if U.S. really has goodwill, is really the purpose, and of course Iran, is really the purpose to put aside this 35 years of conflict with Iran, and which has been very damaging to U.S. U.S. made itself a prisoner of Pakistan in Afghanistan because they cannot get access from Iranian routes and they have to go to Central Asia to come through this way. Now, this is one thing. So if they want to put all this thing, there are, you can say reasonable things. Iran should open, and I will insist on that because I don't think Iran should have access to nuclear weapons either. Iran should open its even to more intrusive inspection by the, but I don't think...
Do you think, let me just ask you this while you're expanding on this. Do you think Iran will be willing, at least in the beginning? Russia at one point offered that they'll enrich their uranium with Iran.
This is a question of national pride. I mean, we are talking about, we have demonized Iran to the extent of things. This is a question of national pride. I mean, Iran is a country with history, culture, people, educated people, talented people that, they were, Israelis have been, talk about terrorism, they were assassinating Iranian nuclear experts. Now, this is a country that for them to have access, also given the past history of Iran that the West has prevented it from gaining access to technology, they cannot just have it to have it somewhere else. Why India doesn't have? Do you really think that, or Pakistan for that matter, which, so the point is, verification, yes. Making sure that you don't weaponize nuclear things, yes. But on the other hand, also the relief has to be meaningful. To say that, for example, in an article, some person said that, oh, well, if we promise Iran that we are not after regime change, then they should give up whatever, enrichment they have. That's not going to work.
Let me bring in another aspect of this, Ambassador, which is this whole idea of, some people say that U.S. portrays it, and Israel, for that matter, portrays it as if Iran gets the nuclear weapons, the world will come to an end when so many other countries already have nuclear
right.
weapons. What is the danger to the region? Explain.
That's a very good question, and it gets to the core of what we're really talking about here. Israel has, we all think, nuclear weapons.
No.
We don't know that,
Oh,
but we
well.
believe so. In years of talking around the Middle East, that never comes up. There is an Islamic nuclear weapon. It sits in Pakistan. Other than some concerns about whether the plentiful terrorists in Pakistan might get a hold of it, nobody's worried about Pakistan using that nuclear weapon as a leverage for regional hegemony. The same with India. Even North Korea, while it's an irrational state, it doesn't have the tradition, it doesn't have the power position, it doesn't have the resources to really threaten the area in terms of its other capabilities, hard and soft power. Quite the opposite with Iran. We have the greatest of respect for Iran, and that's the problem. Just as we had the greatest of respect for Iraq and for Serbia under Milosevic. These are countries that have a long-term tradition of trying to dominate their region. The countries in that region, and in the case of Iran, we're talking about everybody, is very, very concerned about that domination, with or without nuclear weapons. Were Iran to get nuclear weapons, the other countries in the region, some of them at least, almost certainly would. And you would have spiraling out of control an extremely dangerous situation.
Well, this is again, exaggerating. And again, it's one thing just to make assertion. Iran wants to dominate everything. We don't look into the history of Iran. For example, I will say in the past almost 300 years, Iran has not fought one war of aggression. The 1980 war against Iran was done by Iraqis. Saudi Arabia has expanded far more. In fact, House of Saud expanded first in Arabian Peninsula by getting rid of Hijaz and so on. They took territory from Yemen. They took territory from Oman. They are still not resolved their conflict with UAE over the Crimea. After Iran gave up its rightful claim to Bahrain, Saudis made Bahrain. Let me finish, please.
No. I get your point, but because
Saudis interfered in Bahrain with military power. And now we say that Iran wants to dominate the region. Of course, Iran is a big country. But to delegitimize any Iranian action.
Since I get your point, let me ask the ambassador something quickly because we're coming to the end. Do you think the U.S. looks at Iran through the prism of other countries, be it Saudi Arabia or Israel, or because of what she's saying? Do you think that's what's happening sometimes?
That's a good question, Aisha. The United States will have to take into consideration the views of other regional powers, of other countries such as France, China, Russia, Britain, and our friends in the region. But at the end of the day, the United States will make its own assessment. Our assessment is that Iran, to the extent it could, will attempt to dominate the region. Dr. Hunter is right that Iran was invaded in 1980 by Iraq. But by 1982, there were no Iraqi soldiers in Iran. That war went on.
Iranian territory. Until 1998, they were even in 1988, there were Iraqi soldiers in Iranian territory.
There were a few, but most of the fighting
was
was in southern Iraq. That's where the Iranian army was trying to seize southern Iraq, just as the Iranians tried to seize control of the Gulf in 1988 and had to be resisted by the American military. This is an aggressive country with an aggressive history.
But that is simply not true. Can I just say one point? The problem with this, and this is again, I have been dealing with this Iran-US issues for at least 30 years. And first in 1989, when there was chance of reconciliation between Iran and so on, Saudis came and crying and mewing to the Iranians. Even Turks were unhappy. Mubarak were unhappy. The reason for this is that it's not that because Iran is aggressive. Iran is an important country in the region. That if U.S.-Iran relations improve, the influence and the weight of these countries will be diminished. Now, one thing they don't seem to understand, whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia, in Iran that has good relations with U.S., one of the requirements of that is that Iran should have a far more cooperative relationship with its neighbors than the other way around. But some Arab countries and others, they want to use U.S. power to get rid of Iran.
We only have a minute 30, Ambassador. And Iran with good relationships with Israel, of all its neighbors, do you see a possibility if U.S.-Iran relations improve?
No, I don't. I see Iran in the foreseeable future as a country that will be at odds with its region.
Well, I must thank you both. I know this is a very important topic. We may come back
Can
to
I
it
add to that? Because to end it that Iran cannot have good relations simply is not fair. Iran will be able to have good relations. They already have good relations with most of their neighbors.
I'm so sorry I have to interrupt you. 30 seconds. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming. Our guests were Dr. Shiri Hunter, the author of 7 books on Islam and the director of a project on reformist Islam at Georgetown University, and Ambassador James Jeffrey, a fellow at the Washington Institute, focus on U.S. strategies to counter Iran's influence in the Middle East. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.